and that red light is on, it means that the mic is picking you up. If your red light is on, it means your mic is not on. Oh, we just turned all the lights on and then tried talking about our best move, I think.
All right. Calling to order the Affordable Housing Collaborative meeting of Thursday, February 13th, 2020 at 7:03. We'll just go around and do roll call. Jennifer Kruger, present.
Kenny Burke. Christian Bellini.
Alice Buckley.
Joe Murphy, representative from the Planning Board.
And Kayla Gray from the Planning Board.
Just go through our pile of minutes.
Yes.
Does anybody have comments or corrections? Do you want to go through one at a time, just in case? September minutes. Only thing I picked up is that Josh's name is spelled correctly a couple of times. No E.
I don't know if are we doing grammar on these? Because it was
How picky are we?
things, but I'm not. We're not. Then cool.
Honestly, it's up to you guys.
I'm not
they're
worried.
your minutes, what works for you. Happy to correct whatever you would like to see corrected or leave whatever you
I didn't see anything
inconsequential.
with any kind of substance on it. So.
Can a motion to approve then, unless somebody has something?
Motion to approve.
All in favor? Aye. Approved the minutes. We don't have any correspondence, I'm guessing.
We do not have any.
Okay. So moving on there. Then we're just going to go into our updates on our activities that we've been working on, the multi-household and inclusionary zoning. Do you want to update? Want me to update anything?
It's up to you if you want to. I can kick something off and then we go from there. So your agenda is kind of the update for the multi-household and inclusionary zoning project. So the cottage zoning, ADUs, and inclusionary zoning are sort of, we're trying to push as kind of the first wave of changes coming out of that. That was after our October joint meeting with the planning board and you all, where we sort of identified those as a going forward. So out of that, Jeff Davis, the consultant, started doing some work on putting it together. And sort of where we go from here on that will largely be that you guys are looking at these topics tonight. The planning board did a look at them on Tuesday night, so a couple of nights ago. I'd like to see us basically go so that in March we can do a public engagement event and a public discussion input session. Tentatively, we're sort of saying March 19th, but that was largely just on schedules and room availability. So if that is something that absolutely does not work for people, we can find another date. It's important that you all can be there. And then that we would then get some input from the community on pieces that they want to see, get some usable feedback from that, make some tweaks to the draft regulations as they sit today based on kind of what we are hearing there and what we hear tonight and Tuesday night. And then in the spring, we'll be trying to push forward some zoning ordinance amendments to that piece to get them through the planning board onto the council and hopefully in place by end of spring. That's early summer. That's kind of our goal on that project. Jen, do you want to do sort of a piece on sort of how a couple of the focus groups went that have been happening over the last month or so?
Sure. I participated in two, or facilitated two focus groups, one with the South Kingstown Land Trust that was very well attended and really interesting. And there was actually a surprising amount of consensus about accessory dwelling units and smaller units and people, a lot of people getting older and wanting to retire in town and maybe downsize. So that was one interesting takeaway from that, and definitely a lot of support around the idea of building where there are services and where, you know, we have some density already to preserve open space. We sort of anticipated, but it was nice to sort of just hear that from folks, that was an idea that was supported, and that folks who are advocates for open space are certainly advocates for smart development in the right places as well. And then I did a smaller focus group with sort of some families with first-time home buyers and multi-generational families, it turned out. So we had some families that were sort of like living together in a house, talking about expanding. And among that group, you know, half the group had recently purchased a house and thought they might stay there for a while, and the other half were thinking either their home was too small for the amount of family members they had in it, or that they were anticipating maybe another generation was going to be in the home, and how were they going to expand. So sort of, you know, all the things we've been talking about are bearing out in the focus groups too, or, you know, anecdotally we're hearing from people that these are definitely the issues that are at the forefront.
So that's sort of where we're at on that. Jeff Davis and the Horsley Witten group have been working on putting together like a story map. Basically, story maps are, people aren't familiar with them, they're basically kind of an idea to sort of tell a story on a website, moving through pictures and areas and places. There you've given a draft at a story map we're going to try and be pushing out. Our thought is to be pushing things out with about 3 weeks or like a month's worth of lead up to that March event to sort of just get a dialogue going, get people sort of seeing where resources are and trying to promote, letting people know we've developed the story map. We have the website that has a lot of this information, and just sort of getting people to start getting a little more familiar with it. So we're going to be trying to do some stuff to figure out how to push that out. We're going to use all of our sort of normal tools, but if people have other good ideas of ways to push things out, the more the merrier. So that's sort of where we're at on that project.
Any questions on any of that update? No. Jump into the accessory dwelling unit.
Yes, I have for you all hot off the press a copy of the town manager's draft of a taxation amendment to the tax code for the town for ADUs. That if you want to pass those around.
Is this the one that we worked on together?
I assume so. Yes,
I mean,
yeah,
long ago, but
yeah. I think
feels like it. Yeah.
Yes, I feel like yes is the answer to that.
I assume he's had some discussion at some level, probably at a very high level with some members of the council, and believes that there's a chance that it'll be accepted or that it's workable.
Yeah, I think so. I'm making that same assumption.
What's that?
I said I'm making that same assumption.
I feel like we heard that happened before, right?
Yeah, I think I will say that Rob spends a lot of time trying to socialize ideas amongst people and get them a little familiar with something that might be coming their way. So if he thinks this is something that's kind of ready to go, then I bet he likely has done some of those conversations. As a quick piece, I guess what I will tell you is, so this is here as a draft for you guys to take with tonight and look at as you will, not sort of expect anybody to go through it in a whole lot of detail right now. But we wanted to give it to you because we knew we would do an update on it. And when we're thinking about the changes to the zoning ordinance about accessory dwelling units, the plan here is to roll these two things out together and not in slightly off step from one another, but instead just do a one push. Remove the things that seem to be barriers, where we think they're barriers in the zoning ordinance, and roll out a taxation incentivizing program. Instead of rolling out a tax incentivizing program and then saying, oh, by the way, we're changing the rules about how we do this, being able to push it forward with one messaging and sort of take one pass at the topic. So I think Rob's plan is to try and have the council's consideration of this fold in with that same timeline we're trying to do on getting the changes to the rules.
Does this need state approval? Is this the one that needs state approval?
All right, so here's the deal on it. We did not end up needing state approval for it. The solicitor's office looked at it and realized that basically the authority already granted to us was wide enough that it was comfortable to make this as part of it without needing to go.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be a simpler process for the council to just consider doing. There's some pieces we kind of need to look at the interplay of these things that when I was glancing at this before the meeting tonight, I was thinking about, but we'll probably talk about those more when we get to the ADU topic piece.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
It looks like we can move on to the advisory opinion to the planning board for the village at Curtis Corner. We have someone here. Chat. Figure out what mic you want to sit next to. Of course you have a mic.
I'll share my mic.
There you go.
So I'm John Kenyon. I'm an attorney for the applicant 5A Builders LLC, who I was hoping would be here tonight, but apparently isn't. And I was hoping his engineer would bring plans, but he's not. So, all right. So the property is located off of Curtis Corner Road. It's just under 30 acres in size. It's in an R20 zoning district. There's about 7.5 acres of developable land. And the applicant's proposing, he filed a comprehensive permit application. He's proposing a 24-lot subdivision, and 16 of the lots would contain single-family residences, 8 would contain two-family residences. And his vision on this is he wants the whole development to be affordable, but not necessarily restricted affordable. So he's going for the probably mid 300 range for the single family residences. And his vision is to have the one of the units of each two family designated as affordable. And his thinking behind that is in other developments in this town and other towns, he's had trouble marketing and selling affordable units. In his experience, he finds that it's tough to get people that qualify, first of all, for the loan and also meet the affordable requirements. He says there's a lot of parents that will come and say, well, I'm going to help them and put the deposit down, but I don't want to do that if it's going to be restricted because they're not going to get the price going up, so the value going up. So he finds that the parents end up saying, I'm going to give you a little bit more, and then you don't have to be restricted. So his thinking with this is the two families, someone could buy the two families and then live in one side and rent out the other, get the income, but also still get the appreciation from the value of the building going up. So his proposal is he's required to have 25% affordable to have the 8 required units all be in the two families. And at the we've had one hearing before the planning board. I think it was Joe that actually brought up the question of integration, whether that was considered integration.
So the duplex would be one market and one...
Yeah.
Okay. Was that always his plan?
Yeah.
I didn't get that at the meeting. I was
Sometimes
thinking,
tough to
I thought
understand.
that it was both the duplexes, both of those are going to be affordable. That was my impression, so I'm sorry about that. I think that one's going to be a lot more welcome.
Yeah. So obviously it'd be rental units, which I know the town needs affordable rental units. So the thinking is that
The preliminary to the planning board, I think it was fairly well received. I mean, it has the infrastructure in the area as far as water and sewer. So, I mean, overall, I think it was pretty well received.
This isn't a condo complex, correct? This is not an HOA type of situation. So, right. So the multifamilies will be sold as individual, like 2-unit properties, right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, what's great is being a mortgage loan originator, when you're buying a 2-unit property, you can do a Rhode Island housing loan, and you can use the rental income to help qualify for the mortgage.
Yeah.
And you can do an affordable mortgage doing that. Many of the lenders, including us, have 0 down, no PMI loans for first-time home buyers who are buying multifamily properties like this, which folds into the affordability. So,
Somehow Alex actually knew that. Yeah, he talked to somebody at Rhode Island Housing. And that was part of how we came up with this. Yeah.
had gotten from Alex, John, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the finishes, although they're not exactly the same, will be, for the most part, similar.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be from white instead of stone, but for the most part. The one thing that I think we was still a little outstanding is we asked roughly the size, and he said they would be smaller, but there was no definition of whether he meant much smaller or a little smaller. So I think that's something we still was looking.
Did he give you the figures, Kayla? He did give numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it was close. I think it was like 1,800 and 1,600 or something like that.
Is there going to be, is there going to be homeowners association fees in this neighborhood?
Well, it's going to be a public road, so there won't,
There's not, okay.
the drainage will be the town.
So there.
Yeah, we had also talked about discussing with the town, transferring some of the open space of the town to use for flood mitigation.
So the affordable is going to be the rental units? Yes.
Yes.
No. So if there was any HOA, then it would be somehow picked up by the landowner or the market.
Right. If there's an HOA, the fees are going to be pretty negligible. It's not going to be a whole lot for them to pay for.
It'll be interesting to see how the market responds to one market rate and one rental.
Especially with a brand-new property, because the fear is landlording, right? So if I'm buying an existing two-unit property as a first-time home buyer, I'm worried about what's going to happen with the other property. These are brand new.
I mean, it could very well serve, I think, the need of a multi-generational, where the parents may help out with the money, but they don't have the income, so they could live in the affordable housing.
Because you can do a gift, so same buyer could buy that with a gift. You can't get 100% financing, but you can do 3.5% down. So if you get a gift and you get a cosigner, you know, for the multi-generational, it's still very low down payment. I think it's a win-win.
There's nothing that prohibits the parent to live in the affordable housing, right, as long as they meet the act.
Exactly.
It's still just amazing to me that so much different between you think that they would all be the same.
Blown my mind to find out how little that.
Well, and something he was saying earlier, and with my experience with we've talked about this in the past, with the affordable units, a lot of times if we're doing financing for them, it ends up being people that are not necessarily intended for it, meaning it's an elderly couple who are putting 50% down, who have $3 million in the bank, but they're only drawing $3,000 a month from their retirement, and it's not asset-based most of the time with the monitoring agencies, so they're buying an affordable unit, and really it's not really what it's intended for. And you do find that with the developments. That's why I kind of like the way that you're approaching this. It's a little bit different, and it could probably play against that a little bit. So
We have a condo development in Narragansett that we represented. I think they had 3 affordable units that were required, and Those people came in later, and the other units had sold for $600,000 to $800,000. So they all did we don't want affordable people living in our development. And the crazy thing was that 2 out of the 3 all belonged to the same country club as the rest of them.
Yeah.
Because of that, they were all wealthy people that just didn't. And it worked out in that case because then the people weren't upset because it was their friends that were moving there, but it's not the objective.
I think personally, the solution of putting it on the multi-units could help that, because people are probably, some folks like that are less likely to maybe buy a multi-unit property, whereas you might get more of a multi-generational buyer who's going to purchase that property with their family in it or something. So I think it's a solution.
Just in case anybody watches or listens to this, it is important to note that about a third of our households in town are 80% of the median or below.
Yeah.
So just, plant that seed, friends. A third of our households. Okay, so there's a lot of people who need this kind of housing.
Yeah. I'd just like to see units being built. I'm happy with, frankly, when I see the development, I like the fact that there's new properties going up and in that price range in general. So.
I like the fact that the duplex has both the market rate and the affordable. Voice no concern if the affordable is all in one structure and how that structure is going to appear, and whether people would be able to differentiate. It's like, well, they live in an affordable house. That's what we're obviously trying to avoid. So, it being a market rate and an affordable, I gotta believe that the builder will make that appear just on the outside of the same quality as the I like that.
It's a unique take.
Thank you. See, and I'm the worst culprit. I think one of the things that I've appreciated about the project is I appreciate the desire to create naturally occurring affordable housing out here too. We don't have any real abilities to require that, right? We don't have any way to restrict what the single family homes sell for. If they go like hotcakes and the market drives up the price, it's such as beyond our control on those. But the intention that that's being brought to the project, to have them be built at a scale and at a price that keeps them within a moderately affordable price, even though not deed restricted, is a nice thing. We need some of that coming online too, right? We need some of that like naturally occurring modest housing coming online too for us. And that's something that I think has been a nice benefit in this project too, is that I think there's an honest desire to see some of that get created here.
Are the lot sizes and the frontage, from what I was reading, are those exceptions or something, or is there?
Yeah.
The density is much higher than what otherwise would be allowed, but by using the statewide comprehensive permit process, we can propose relief from that, which is what.
Sure.
But, Kayla, as far as, that's what we have to pick up as well.
Yeah.
So, and this, where's the last instance of developments at this level? 5,000 square feet. Charles?
I mean, Snow Carver.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I don't really know. We have not seen, I have not, since I have been here, or once prior to me, seen affordable housing permits that came in that created single-family lots that were really looking to honestly do something of this size. The comprehensive permits we have seen that we do have on the books that have come in more recently are projects like Hawkins Green, which is it's a different type of building. It's an apartment building. They got some relief on the numbers of units they could put there within it, but the feeling on density is a bit different. And so we don't have a very clear or good precedent of a time that sort of relief has been sought.
Is there a, just geographically in Kingstown County, or even, where can I drive and see something that has
The R10.
I was going to say,
Zoning?
honestly, large sections of your R10 zoning district that are non-conforming and smaller than they are. So a lot of your downtown neighborhoods neighborhood areas in CL and
Street,
Field
yeah.
and off of High Street are actually at an R5, R6 density more so than the R10 they're sitting in.
What about that one on Broad Rock Road, on the left there? Early Broad Rock before you're going from Mold Mountain and you're going towards the Y on the left-hand side?
Yeah, that was, Bill, his last name. So that was kind of cottage zoning before yet, but they weren't cottages. But it
Yeah.
was, those lots are pretty small. They're probably 5,000 to 7,000 square feet.
They're big houses on
Yeah.
tiny lots.
Yeah. So the zoning for this is R20. The future land use is medium to high density residential, which is up to 4.35 acres of dwelling units per acre. So actually what we're proposing actually meets that density. So that's how we came up with that number, is we meet the, and a lot of times with comprehensive permits in the past, what's happened is the town has said, we'll let you go down to the next zoning, but not below that. So if you're at an R40, they might let you go to R20, but they don't want you to go to R80 or R10.
Well, I think, in light of other conversations we've had just about how development might happen going forward and the fact that this is sort of, in the village center corridor, the Wakefield, Peacedale, Kingston Village Center corridor, I mean, the location seems like the right place to talk about more density for all the reasons we've talked about in the zoning project.
Right down the road from the school, you have the public safety right there.
Just like the multi-units, one of the biggest problems we have on the mortgage side is getting comps for multi-units. I'd love to see more two-families, just because, if someone buys a two-family, it's almost impossible to get an appraisal for.
Yep.
So I like this a lot.
So, right now I sort of have, I've taken some notes on where we at on a motion for sort of what your recommendation or advisory opinion is. And I'm sort of going to go through these quickly on what I've heard so far, so you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, missed something, or you want to see something said a little differently. What we have basically is that there's support for the use of, for the development of more multifamily units in general, going backwards. Support for the idea of the combination of market rate and affordable within the duplex because of the financing abilities that are there. I will flush this out with the recording, but the financial ability to use specific financing, to use that income generated from the rental unit to help count towards the qualifying of the mortgage, the ability for intergenerational use of these properties, the idea that the HOA fees for this would fall on the market rate units as properties because the rentals are falling within them means that there's another sort of additional piece of financial responsibility on those affordable units that likely would not carry through. Support for just seeing new units being developed within areas with the services for them.
Yeah, it'd be good if you captured the market and the affordable in the same building being consistent with the comprehensive permit requirements, that they be compatible. So you could capture that having, both the market and versus the alternative. This is a much more in line with the comprehensive permit requirements for our failing it.
Other thoughts around the table or things we want to impart upon John Kenyon before he leaves us?
And if you just kind of capture that the affordable and the market rate will be, although not the same size, will be similar magnitude, and of similar finishes. Are they integrated throughout the development? They're not all in one place, right?
Yeah, they're here, and there's one there.
I would think that that's a noteworthy too, that if you guys like the way they're integrated, that we just make that
here, two here. Right. Yep.
So we need a motion for all of the above? Is
Is that
that what Kayla said?
A motion to, it sounds to me like a motion to, an advisory motion in support of the development, highlighting the items discussed.
Give I can't see, it's too long. Give a motion in support of what Kayla just said.
Any other discussion? All right. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before I leave, I think I saw on the agenda you're going to discuss cottage zoning, and I just implored you to do something about it, because we've had a few projects that I think would have been perfect for cottage zoning that we couldn't do because we didn't have anything in there. And there's a few that I think are in the works that hopefully will be able to go forward.
So, John, where do you think that is appropriate? Where, give us your thoughts and thoughts of who we work with, where you think would be fit in well for the community as well as being good for the potential developers?
I think in town, infill, like even this location would have been a good spot for it. I think it'd be tougher when you get out to the R40s and the R80s. It might be tougher to do that. It might be a creative way to do it, but I'm thinking more of the already dense locations.
I think our initial thought is on the sewer, future sewer area, future sewer district.
Yeah, we had a similar discussion Tuesday night a bit about that, about how if you were to get out into the R80 and R200, when you take that number of units and you scale it out to parcels that size,
Yeah,
it's the idea of a like cottage community almost becomes like a cottage neighborhood. Like there's a different way to approach that design that doesn't necessarily carry
Yep.
forward.
I think those densities are under with WTS is going to be difficult to assess volumes.
We have a project that we're working on, and I think someone gave the planning department some preliminary plans, and I went in there one day, and there were two people from other departments looking at the plans, and I was like, why are you guys in here? You're in the tax? And they were like, we love this, we want one of these. When are these gonna be built? So it seemed to me like there'd be a demand for them. All right, thank you, have a good night.
Okay, so on to discussion of accessory dwelling unit regulations. It's our next packet of goodies.
I know, a lot.
A lot of packets this week.
There was a lot of packets. There were a lot of things in there. Okay, so you guys know more than I think any other. You guys have been working more on accessory dwelling units than any other committee kicking around. So I am going to save you all the general overview spiel on the accessory dwelling units and say I am always a fan for when you want to try and incentivize something, assessing all of the rules you have in place on that thing now and figuring out whether or not the new thing you want to do as an incentive is lining up with the other ways that you regulate it to know the places where, because honestly, if you really want to incentivize something, you want to see it perform well, you want to see it happen, you want to know that you're not silently unaware of little things that make them harder, or if they exist, that you know they exist and you're aware of the fact that there are certain areas or certain things that you want to have a little bit of control on. And so with that kind of an angle in mind, knowing the work you all have been doing on the ADUs with the tax abatement side, I told Rob I wanted to basically take the zoning ordinance and just look through everything we have about ADUs because there are a lot of, this is a topic where there's a lot of little details that affect where they get built in a way that does not always come forward on the sort of pitch on them, on the, you can build them almost anywhere in South Kingstown. That is sort of the thing we say about accessory dwelling units. They're permitted almost everywhere. There are some specific mechanisms about how we permit them that can discourage their development. And so I honestly just wanted to talk with you guys a little bit about what those are tonight. And so because of that, I gave you the section of the regulations on them, and then in the memo, I tried to pull out other portions of the zoning ordinance that live in other places that also affect them. Joe is living in a deja vu, I think, of Tuesday night, so good job, you know where I'm headed. But we basically, one of the first things that I realized about them is in some of our zoning districts, we say that you need the same amount of land to put the accessory dwelling unit on your property as you would to put a whole nother single-family home on your property. So those are, let me get my memo so I'm not.
Or same as a duplex, it's like 1.5 times
Yeah, well, it's actually 2 times if you don't have sewers.
oh, it is right.
So if you are in the,
This,
yeah, and I don't have this,
this little chart.
and if I had a copy of that memo, I served by myself. There you go. So in the R30, R20, and R10 zoning districts, you need 20, like if you were in the R10 zoning district, you would need 10,000 square feet to put your single-family home on your lot. If you wanted to put an accessory apartment on it, and you had sewer service, we would tell you you needed 15,000 square feet. You needed a 50% bigger lot for it. That is not the same as saying it is accessory and allowed by right, in my mind's eye. That is actually saying it's not exactly the same of it's accessory and allowed in all districts. It's allowed in all districts with extra land. If you are in an R10 area that does not have a sewer, you need 20,000 square feet. So that's a double of the amount of land to put in your accessory apartment. When we talk about accessory apartments, we talk about accessory apartments as being something that, because of the size of them, are compatible and easy to integrate onto a single-family home, either as a basement apartment or a portion, or in a connected addition to the house, or even attached to an outbuilding, or even as their own freestanding small outbuilding. That is how we talk about them. In the R10, R20, and R30 districts, were you to come in and pull a permit for it, you could have a conforming lot and be told you cannot do that. It's not considered accessory in these districts. It's actually considered something you need to provide additional land in order to get. And so that, to me, was something I don't think we all are aware of when we talk about how we're trying to incentivize them and where we're okay with them. So that was sort of my first sort of thought on point of concern on them, right, is if we really believe them to be accessory to and reasonable within, then if your OWTS system can support it if you're not on sewer, or if you're on sewer and you have a lot with enough land for just your zone, they should be able to be built just like any other accessory structure would be on your property. That is my feeling on it, but my feeling does not dictate anything. But I wanted to sort of bring that to you all as thoughts and get your feelings on that. Are there things you see as a pro to that? Are things you see as a con to that? Are we a mixed bag? What do you all think about that?
Part of a lot of the discussion about creating the incentive was really to try and create something to scale, because we really don't know how interested people will be. I mean, that's the thing. We can offer this tax abatement, and we might get 2 applications. We might get 200, probably not 200. But so we've sort of been operating on starting small. So maybe that the restrictions that exist now could be part of that control mechanism, because we had joked about what happens if we get a ton of them, and we even talked about, do we limit them? Do we limit them to 30 or 50 or something the first year or whatever, and maybe, like I said, maybe we get 3 or who knows. So I think in that case it could work to our advantage as far as keeping control of how many of these applications come in. The flip side of that is that's the first time I'm hearing of that. So, you know, we've been talking about how it's built into the current ordinance. Like, you know, anybody can get you can get them in certain areas as long as you have sewer. I think that was kind of the main thing we were discussing. So it's interesting to hear that there may be some subtleties to those different zoning requirements. So.
I'm actually trying to reconcile what you just presented as table to what was just approved. So, for example, developer wants to come in with a nice, very, very dense area and duplex on 10,000 square foot lot. So, if we say that's okay, we have an existing property in the same residential zones that we want to. So we've got they want to convert the basement. So I guess there's two components. There's like the non-structural, non-addition, right, non-external building.
Like
Convert
integrated
something,
in.
yeah, versus something that's appended to, which could visually look like it wasn't originally designed with this subdivision. And I also, just a sidebar, I get how a lot of us all go back to sewers, and that's not, that should be primarily direct water development. I think the burden is really going to be on the developer at home. They want to go in and get an upgraded certificate. Just go all septic system. It's crazy. So anyways, back to my original point. Yeah, so this is, I guess, sobering, right? So this is different than I thought it was. Casual talking about, am I right?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I honestly think when we talk about it as being by right, we're doing a disservice to the topic.
Right.
I-
It's
I-
confusing.
Yeah, I don't. I think, like, if you were at home listening to our conversations, right, and saying, "We allow these by right. We allow these by right. We allow these by right," and then you came in and said, "Great, I want to have one," and we said, "Oh, but not in you. Actually, you would need to have." It's not, yours isn't by right. You would need to have additional land. You would honestly need to have additional land enough to build a full-size duplex on it. At that point, in my mind's eye, basically, really what it comes down to is, if you're going to have a duplex, you need the same amount of space as a single-family home with an accessory dwelling unit. What are we saying is the difference at this point between the accessory dwelling unit and the duplex? Aside from that, one of them is going to have a size restriction and one of them wouldn't.
I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking about with this, is that right now, our accessory dwelling regulations are for very small. It's for one or two people. It's one bedroom. It's, 750 square feet. It's small. So, right, why would you need the same square footage as a duplex?
Right,
That doesn't make sense to me.
Like, why
If
own
we're going
that
to
property?
continue in that direction, right? Because there's also been conversation about whether accessory dwellings should be able to be bigger. And if that was the case, then maybe it makes sense, right? So.
Yeah, but to me, it almost seems like if their accessory dwelling units are clearly a lesser than two dwelling units, right? Two dwelling units could have as many bedrooms as you can make work. Single-family home, an accessory is necessarily, by definition, a little bit smaller than that. Certainly not bigger, right? Like it's just it is a lesser development because of the way we size restrict them. It should either have a little less need for additional land if we're very attached to additional land being needed, or we should say is as accessory as it would be on an R40 lot. That's something I think I want to make sure our event on the 19th gets some sort of community input on that too, and what people think on, if your neighbors or if you were interested in building this, would you want to see there be additional land, or would you want to see that you can just do it on your property as it is today? I think there's like a little bit of understanding how much development is happening on your neighbor's property that we could probably hear from a wider network on to start to think on this. My feeling on this is that we shouldn't necessarily need additional land area Joe, do you want to talk to our planning board then on it?
Well, I think, there was discussion of the plan board. I think the plan board ended up, as you just reflected, that it didn't necessarily need additional land. I do think that there's a little bit of a difference between building an accessory unit in an existing structure versus a separate structure. There is some language where the building has to be subordinate, I'm not sure what it was, but to the primary structure. I mean, a lot of this comes down to how you develop it. You can make it look very, fit well in, or you put this separate building up there that doesn't fit well. But I think that the general feeling of the plan board was that if we want to encourage accessory dwelling units, then we should not necessarily require additional land.
I'd say that's my leaning. We've been talking for, I feel like, a couple of years at least about needing more 1 and 2 bedroom units, smaller type units in town. And obviously want to think about, where there might be impacts that are detrimental or that don't fit in the community. But I think that this is something that we really need, and that in general, we want the policy to be streamlined and understandable to the average consumer. And right now, I think there's definitely some flaws that are really confusing to someone who's interested in building one of these. And so if it's something we want to see more of, I think we should work towards something more straightforward as well.
I was understanding Kristen's point earlier. There are ways to manage this. If it's roll something out, so it may not. People want to be positive and just test the waters for a certain period of time. See what the interest is. If there's a low barrier, a reasonable barrier, a non-structural, non-physical add-on to a building. I can see a lot of opportunity today. People to say it's a couple of petitions and pull permits. That's fairly easy to convert something where, I'm in this case, it's a little bit out of bounds. Space, my house, I just see it coming. So, be interested in seeing if that works without visually disturbing any existing neighborhoods. See how that would work out. Without creating this more than 5 people on a lot. I had to throw that out.
Fair enough. Sure. Okay, so another one, I'm going to kind of just move through the topics and you guys take me where you want to take me. The next one is, okay, so again, then we have the square footage size, right, and number of bedrooms. There's a long and storied past, I have learned, on the square footage sizes of accessory dwelling units. At one point, they were larger. They were allowed to go up to, I believe, 900 square feet. There's a chance I'm having this actually wrong, so just bear with me. But you used to be able to build them bigger. There was a concern that people were then enclosing from the building official at the time, that then people were enclosing deck space and were enclosing these things, and these accessory apartments went from being 900 square feet to being 900 square feet with a deck that had a porch that then got 3 feet seasoned in, that suddenly was insulated, and now we have a larger. And there was a concern from the building official that it was just starting to become a little bit of a runaway thing from him on the size of those. So I think it's around 2013 the changes were made to bring it down to, say, 750 square feet, 1 bedroom. The idea being if we could bring it in a little bit more when people did do that thing that they keep doing about closing in additional spaces, they're not becoming so big that you can become homes, right? So that's sort of the story I have heard on the backside of how we've ended up at 750. It wasn't a first pass of a number. There was a pass before it with a larger number. But that's a piece for us to know is an honest restriction that exists there, right? There, 750 square feet, limited to 1 bedroom. I don't know that there is necessarily, I don't know that I hold honestly an opinion on you guys on what's right or wrong on that. I think that you want the accessory dwelling units to always be an accessory dwelling unit and always have some sort of control that makes you understand that the impact of it could never get too large, right? That it wasn't going to have so much space that it could then just become a duplex that was there by right if it shouldn't have been able to become that. But that's sort of a piece that exists today. Our zoning enforcement officer today, Wayne Pimentel, has brought that up to me as a topic of maybe when you guys are talking ADUs, you could talk about whether or not you'd want to relax that, because I have a lot of people who do say, I would love it if you would let me get a little bit bigger and 2 bedrooms.
Is there an opportunity to have that side-by-side assessment, side-by-side or building-by-building assessment? If somebody's got a 900 square foot house, 100 residents, or if there's a 750 square foot, 100 residents, that might be difficult to ensure that primary and secondary. But if you've got something
Oh, I see what you're saying.
substance, say, into scale. But if you've got 5,000 square foot, something no more than a certain amount, but there's an opportunity to scale up to.
Like a percentage of your current square footage kind of thing?
Yeah, but yes, but capped at something that's reasonable. I don't know what that number is. It's 1,000 or 900 or whatever it is. I don't know if there are other metrics to say, just for standard houses, how many square feet should you have per person? Is there a desirable number out there that you could use to say, well, that's kind of an industry standard, and drop a little bit so that it's subordinate and scale up to that if the residence is large enough?
It seems like cost of building would start to get into that to make it prohibitive, I would think, right? Because the larger they say, one of my good clients who's a builder talked to me about how it's almost the same amount of money to build a ranch as it is to build a 2-story home, because essentially you're building the whole house with the ranch and then you're just adding the second floor. As you're getting larger into these properties, if we're talking about one that's not connected to the house, at some point it's going to become cost prohibitive for most people. I mean, to build like a sizable structure and with a foundation, and then if you're doing it's going to cost a lot. I feel like you can manage to the exception on these, like to the death. You know, at some point it comes down to just regular. People are going to build crazy stuff in their houses anyway. So at some point, that's where I guess the building inspector gets involved. But as far as the regulatory portion of it, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we regulate that. I just don't.
I didn't really have a problem with the 750 square feet. HUD does have regulations about how small units can be for a number of people who live in it, and size of bedrooms, etc. But with all the beautiful tiny house designs out there, you can really do a lot with 750 square feet. And then you don't have to worry about all those cars. And when you go to 2 bedrooms, it could be a couple with a child. It could be a lot more people and more two cars instead of 1 car. It sort of gets to be a lot of control. So I don't have an issue with that.
I personally like the 750 square feet, and the reason why is when I think about housing and I think about the needs of the community, I think that there's this type of diversity. So we need these small apartments for a certain portion of the population, and then we need maybe small affordable houses for a certain population. We need maybe more expensive or larger houses for families, and then we need maybe apartment buildings. And I like the idea of having separate tools for the different pieces. The problem is that when we look at one piece and one tool, let's say the affordable housing, and we try to make it meet several of those, then we start creating situations. So, for instance, we're just talking about maybe accessory dwelling units not good if it's a separate structure in an R20. And as we start letting this be bigger, then we have to start ruling out places in the zoning. So having tools that target the different pieces, by keeping it small, then we can allow it in more zoning districts and in more situations. So I like the idea of keeping it small, that being a very specific tool for a certain part of the housing that we want, and that way we can maximize that, and maybe another tool for the larger structures. That's my
I kind of have a similar feeling to when we get to the cottage zoning and we start talking about the footprints of those cottage zoning units. When the cottage zoning unit leads into the size of the accessory dwelling unit, like at what point do you sort of lose track on what the tools at what size are, right? Like if you start saying the cottage developments can be the same size as the accessory dwelling units, and you can build them on their own and a concentration of them there, are we starting to sort of lose the diversity of products being provided if we start to blend those two closely together? I honestly don't know that I think there's a problem with the 750 necessarily. I think the problem more is that we don't have something that tends to promote smaller units just bigger than accessory units, because it's mostly being developed as single-family homes on single-family lots, and people just aren't building 900, 1,000 square foot single-family homes on lots.
Yeah, so when we get up to 900, 1,000, what we're really talking about is potentially small ranches.
Yeah.
And now we're not, so I think of the ADU as being maybe a young professional just starting out, or maybe a elderly person who wants to stay with the family, or maybe a rental that's one or two people. When we start going up to 1,000 square feet, now we're talking about it being a ranch, and behind your house, you got a ranch house, you know, and that's why my personal feeling is let's keep it small, let's use it as a tool for the small, and let's get other tools for that other size housing, other size family.
I think that makes a lot of sense, too, in the context, again, of what we're talking about and trying to work towards having more diverse housing options in town, and that this wouldn't be the only thing that we're trying to do. We're also trying to have other kinds of housing options.
So most people that say I'd like to have 2 bedrooms, maybe even 3 in an ADU, well, maybe it's not the ADU that needs to satisfy that. Maybe it's another tool.
In terms of the existing housing stock, maybe the last 30 years has been constructed, I'm thinking that there's a sweet spot, 1,500 to 1,500 is, depending on how it's constructed, to 2,000 square foot, where it's just for me, it's a math thing. If somebody converted their basement, their 1,500 that could be right there, that's perfect. It's optimized. Utilities. If they're a little bit beyond that, it could be that it could be the type of person that chooses. So I agree in terms of an external unit. That gets to be kind of big and walk into the back but I'm interested in understanding what are the tools that may be available for conversions of existing interior space that might bump up against the 750. I've just been in a lot of houses, a lot of subdivisions around town where I think there's a lot of it out there. And given the age of those structures, there's a lot of families that are turning over, and some people, like myself, are staying in the house where they just have a ton of space.
There may be some type of form-based zoning where if you have a house, it's an existing structure, in one of these houses, let's take downtown Wakefield, and you decide you want to convert that into 2 apartments. You're not going to change the size of the structure, you're not going to say the outside appearance. It's a 3,500 square foot house, and you want to make 2, that would be a good option. So I think that's a little bit. It's a little different than the ADU, because we're trying to maximize its use, and in order to do that, we have to keep it somewhat limited, I think, in size and how it's limited by the structure.
There's one of the things actually in this whole quest for reuse of houses, something that a lot of towns do that is exactly what you guys are talking about here, is allow people to reuse the same footprint shell of the building to house more units if you can keep it all within it and keep it functionally sort of appearing as the same thing, right? But saying, look, we built these old houses. It's a tool often used actually in places where you have historic old homes, right? It's the manor house sort of style of the world. It's the back in the day we built these beautiful large homes, and now they are very expensive for people to heat and often not full. And that if you could take, say, the 3 stories of your Victorian home and turn them into stacked flats within the existing footprint, keeping the character of it the same on the outside, should we be able to just let you do that, right? Like that's a piece about sort of reusing the space inside of your footprint as it exists today, and acknowledging that that's usually less impactful on sort of what the shape of the character of things around you is. Those usually end up turning into more questions about where you're going to, like, where people are putting their cars, right? And how you're actually turning your driveway into then functioning like a real parking lot for people, so it doesn't become cars on front lines.
But in that case, the units within the building are not necessarily supported.
Right. Yeah, there are a lot of places that's something that when we get through the sort of phase 1 thing, the phase 2 things we start talking about, the idea, I'll tell you guys sort of my idea in the SK home style project right now with the sort of lower hanging fruit coming first is it's an opportunity for us to all cut our teeth in how we're talking about this, what things work well where, how they use, and then the next things we're going to start talking about are the things that are a little trickier to figure out how you do, the ADU pieces, the cottage zoning pieces, some changes to our inclusionary zoning. Those are the simpler things for us to figure out making changes to right now. We then sort of have to start looking at how we encourage people to reuse the existing housing stock a little better. I think these my understanding of that is we will largely hit that when we start doing that sort of second round of pushes on things, is looking at how we start reusing our existing built environment, not just letting people build the newer, different, smaller. Here's an interesting one for you. We love the apartments over the garages. And if your garage was separate from your home, you can actually only build it 15 feet high. So you can't ever put the apartment above it. The height for accessory structures in some of our zoning districts is 15 feet. That doesn't let you put that thing we sort of sell on them. Doesn't always let you do it. If your garage is attached to your house, you can, because then your primary structure's height requirement of 35 feet is in place. But if you had, say, the garage in the back and you wanted to put the apartment above it, you wouldn't be able to bring your eaves up enough to put an apartment in there without getting a variance from the zoning board for the height of that structure.
What if you could connect them? I'm just curious because I know somebody who's like they're really close.
I think if you could connect them, you could probably get a case
Okay.
to
Just curious.
float through it.
What constitutes a connection?
As part of the build, they come together.
That is actually something we talked about a fair amount downstairs recently. I think by our definition, it is they have to share some sort of structural component which connects them. It is not it's looser than you think.
Fascinating.
But so that is a piece to think about. Letting the height of accessory structures come up enough that you could actually put a second story and put that apartment above a garage might help us actually see people put that in there if that's something we're okay with, right? Like a lot of the ways that accessory dwelling units have charm is or one of the ways people tend to find they have charm is when they feel like they are those carriage houses, those back house sort of feeling. And that sort of a thing is actually very, very hard to get to be able to build.
I mean, I wouldn't want to see an accessory dwelling unit be 2 stories with the unit on both. I think the 750 kind of prevents that. So, I mean, and this would be a kind of another, I guess, argument where we just made it. You know, it's not going to 1,000, and then you could possibly have the 2-story out in the backyard. But the garage, I think, that's good. I mean, I don't think it goes up to 22 feet or so. It's a garage. Right below. It's kind of how what you want the ADU to look one day.
Is the fear that they're going to convert the bottom part to a separate?
I will tell you that the fear is nothing on this one. The fear is nothing on this one. It is honestly when we went through and when the ADU zoning was put in place, no one looked at what the base zoning for accessory structures was as it always had been going back decades. And so I truly see this one as honestly just an oversight of how when you go into a building permit, to pull a building permit, all of the little pieces that get checked within that we might not honestly in the planning department or planning boards be always thinking about when we're crafting new rules.
So I've got a friend that's got a 2-car garage. He's got a tourist storage right there.
Yep.
So again, that's a different addition. It's not attached to the house. So perfect opportunity for accessory dwelling. Yes.
already existing and it looks like a garage?
No, and it depends what, yeah, exactly. If you wanted to put one there, you could probably use it as it is. It depends what zone you're in, too. If you are in like the R80 zoning district and R200 zoning district, your accessory structures can be 20 feet high. 20 feet high is actually likely still not enough to get 2 full stories, but it's closer. It might be, honestly, it might be, right? A garage, you do need a little bit of head clearance. Nobody's got any put ceiling in the garage, really. You got 10, probably have 18 inches to floor joists and insulation, mechanicals, and fireproof in the garage and your apartment above. But it's probably more like 22. You might be able to squeeze it in at 20. You definitely are not squeezing it in at 15. And so one thing that we can think about doing is making a change to basically just say if your accessory structure is housing an accessory apartment, if your accessory structure, because this stands for if you're building a shed or anything, right? It's the height requirement right now doesn't care what's in it. It just cares that it's an ancillary building on your house lot. We could actually make that a little more nuanced and not do sort of a flat sweep and say everybody's accessory buildings can be 20 feet. We could honestly say your accessory building could be 22 feet, whatever the right height is to get you that 2 stories if it contains an accessory apartment. Or you could honestly just increase the height of accessory buildings to 20 feet across the board. There's different ways we could look at it, but I think inevitably that is something we would want to see straightened out is the 15 in. If we're going to say that's what we want, we just need to know that that is not.
It brings up an interesting idea in that if somebody were, if I was in, like, for example, we thought about this because we've got 2 girls who are going to be driving soon. We've got enough room on the property to build a 2-car garage. But it'd be much more incentivizing for me to build a 2-car garage with an apartment on the top. Maybe my father could live in at some point or something, whereas when you just build a 2-car garage, it has no value to your property, essentially. It's really just a 2-car garage. A 2-car garage. An apartment would. But if it's a new structure, and that would keep it from, that rule would keep it from combine the 2.
The 750 is applicable to the living space, so, garages are typically about 20 to 25 feet.
It's a studio apartment. You can't go crazy.
Almost get a 3-car garage.
Is it possible that, like, if people were doing other kinds of accessory buildings and that height was allowable, that it might start out not necessarily as a place people are living, but it could be more easily convertible to? You know what I mean? Like, what if you had that more as like a shed space or a, you know what I mean? It wasn't a place that you fleshed out as like an apartment at first, but it was kind of like an extra workroom attached to your garage or something like that above. I don't know. I'm just thinking through whether that would just having that room to build higher, whether that would just make it more, it would make it easier in the future for it to be converted.
Yeah, yep, it would make it easier to be converted. I think if you found there's a concern about the height of accessory structures, then you might say it's only for accessory dwelling units that you let it go up. Otherwise, you might do it more across the board. Because the other thing that happens is what happens if I put in an accessory dwelling unit, I stop using it as an accessory dwelling unit, and I got my increased height, but now I've turned it into my man cave or my sheep cave. What about if you not? Like that is the thing I've thought about too. Is what happens if it goes the other direction?
Either way, right.
What happened if you were permissive for a particular type of use, and then the use left the space? I don't know how likely it is because you're building in the infrastructure into that space to have a bathroom and a kitchen space, but it is potentially something that could maybe happen to some degree. But I agree with you. If the height went up universally, people might be more likely to build a space that could become that.
I wouldn't think that would generate too much concern with the neighbors. So you have a garage and you're renting it out, and they may or may not have some issues with your tenants, and then it's empty. They're probably not going to complain. It's going to be quiet now.
Exactly.
It would be the other way that I think you would generate concerns.
It just makes me wonder too with like market fluctuations, right? Because if you had those kind of spaces and there's more pressure and more demand, people might say, "Oh, I should rent this out. Like I can make some money." But it would be a lot easier. I mean, on the flip side, I don't know how many people are going to build that extra space if it's going to cost them more money and they really just want a garage. So it's hard to say whether it would actually happen. But.
That's the argument.
Right.
I feel like it's more likely to turn the basement into an apartment than it is to build a.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like we talk a lot about the single-family unit in the backyard. I feel like that's probably the least likely.
Oh, it's expensive.
Yeah,
Yep.
by far. We had seen some estimates at one point. Like $150,000 if you're building one straight up.
It's probably going to even be higher than that, truthfully, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean-
It's,
Yeah, I think any of these places where we have sort of barriers or limiters to this thing that we want to incentivize, we need to look at that and see
Yeah,
whether.
exactly. Just know what it is, right? Know what it is, so that honestly, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, we need to start putting together sort of users' guides on these things that we want to incentivize. Because, yes, if you happen to be a very engaged citizen who was concerned with municipal policy and what was happening, you may be tracking all of these changes for accessory dwelling units. But if you're just somebody who lives in town who happens to be curious about something or stumbles across it, we kind of actually need to have kind of users' guides to these things. And so part of that user's guide is having a bit of an idea of these are the rules that you have to sort of play within, right? These are the boundaries we set around this thing.
I think there's some confusion anecdotally with that now too. It's hard to, I mean, we've been talking about this for ages. I did not realize the square footage requirements were the way.
Yeah, that was a Rob and I were sitting downstairs talking about it, and I was like, there are a whole lot of little things in that that I think don't perform the way we think they do.
How about for legal non-conforming lot? You thought about that?
Right now, if you're a legal non-conforming lot, you have different setback distances established for your lot, but I don't believe you'd be prohibited from putting one on your property.
So the feeling is the ADU still allowed by right?
Yeah, it's still allowed by
Just be
right, you
different,
would just
just
have
be
to,
the
that way you
setback.
have to just be bringing it in to be proportionally far enough away from your neighbors to the size of the lot. That is sort of where we sit today. I'm going to bring you guys up something new that I didn't sort of have prepped before this until I looked at that tax chapter piece. Another thing, and this is, I have no solution thought of this right now, just a problem I noticed a couple of hours ago. If there's a fee associated with having a monitoring agent to an annual certification on your rental, right? Making sure that your income, your tenant is qualifying, that your lease up is right. There's an annual fee you pay to your monitoring agent. If the fee for the monitoring agent is more expensive than the tax abatement we're giving somebody, I think that's a balance point we need to look at too. If it costs you $3,000 a year to have a monitoring agent on board to do your lease up and income certifications, and the tax abatement we're giving you is worth a value of $400 a year, you're still at a net loss. You still are actually encumbering a larger expense on that annually than we're going to be able to forgive back to you. That's something I want to look into more. I don't know exactly I don't know if we have the ability to establish some sort of a group rate for the monitoring agent or something. I have to do a little bit more looking into what the rates are, but recently I have heard a rate from somebody that was over $2,000 for the annual cost of keeping these things up.
Wow.
From a monitoring agent.
How many hours of work is that? Yeah.
That seems to be very
That seemed very high to me too, and that was the thing that made me look at this and go, we need to look at the way those numbers balance out. All monitoring agents do not do it the same, but I recently have heard of at least one that a project with affordable housing units went to and said, I've got rental units, what am I going to be looking at and having a monitoring agreement here? And the cost was not, I mean, for new development and a developer building, it was something that they will just fold in. When we're talking about it with ADUs and trying to incentivize them, I think it might.
Well, it's difficult because not only you have the reduced amount, but then you have to that monitoring fee, and you're limited to the 80%.
This is like the story I basically told myself was, we would like you to build an accessory apartment on your property, and if you deed restrict it, we'll make it so that it's not sort of a harder tax burden on your property to do it, but you're gonna have to pay this other fee, and it's gonna cost more than the taxes would have.
Let me ask you what other zoning requirements does the town have for waste financial burden? Force them to have a monitoring agent for open space or other pieces of.
If I took a really loose thing, I could tell you almost everyone that has a flexible design residential project, because we make you form a homeowners association to run your open space. We make your homeowners association have the ability to levy fees to encourage that or to protect it. That's a really loose interpretation. Like if I took it more directly to where you're going, it is just on the inclusionary zoning units that get developed that we actually have a, you must incur this legal expense along with it annually every year. Otherwise, it's like supporting infrastructure, right? If you had a private road and you needed to pay for the plowing, you would be forced to incur the cost of your development's infrastructure, be it open space or some other piece. But it is just in our zoning, there's not another time that we say you need to have a third-party entity get involved here. We never, like if you had open space, even honestly, an open space parcel around like a subdivision in town, we put an easement on it, but we do not require you to come up with a third party to monitor it. The town actually serves that.
Okay, thank you. That's the answer. So I'm just going to daisy chain this next one. So again, you want good behavior. I don't know who these third-party market agents are. There's other examples of good behavior that is incumbent upon the property owner, the homeowners association, and the homeowners association. But as you raise the issue that cost of an uncontrolled third-party entity, which uncontrolled meaning we don't control.
I think some of that's going to be changing soon. The entity that's taken over all the monitoring for Rhode Island Housing, Community Housing Land Trust, is now taking over all of those and trying to regulate. That entity is trying to regulate the rest of the monitoring agents because they're not regulated and they need to be. So that might be the point where you start with, like, get your pricing from them. Maybe some sort of they're good guys in this case because they are trying to put monitoring on the rest of the regulations and maybe use those figures.
Yeah. What I want to do is honestly want to make the calls. I want to make the calls to the Lena. I want to make the calls to Mike. I want to make the calls to the monitoring agents right now and just ask, okay, for an annual rental responsibility, what is it that you're charging right now? Because one, we might just want to know that there are certain people. We might want to at least be able to advise people that the cost you may have to pay for monitoring might be different, and it is worth shopping around to some of these different entities to find somebody who's a good partner for you. I also want to try and think about what role the town might be able to play in this too, right? With open space parcels, I say this like with a hard swallow because it's one of the more difficult things we deal with downstairs in planning. On like day-to-day work is we hold the easements, right? We're a vested party. We have the right to come onto your open space. If you are not abiding by it, you're not taking care of it, right? We have the right to come in and make that happen. We sort of take on some of that responsibility of monitoring. If a neighbor builds a shed onto the open space, your whole entire development may very well get a letter from our office downstairs saying, hey, you all aren't allowed to be building out there. And so we do a first line of, like, we actually are a responsible entity for the open space. We are the open space police. When it comes to affordable housing, we always push that out on the monitoring agents. That's partly because of the regulatory scheme on it, right? You need to be deed restricted, be working with a monitoring agent. If there are pieces of it that this program puts forward where the tax assessor is vetting out certain information every year, if that tax assessor information we're vetting could be given to the monitoring agent, and we could have sort of a group buy price for the affordable housing units in town with one monitoring agent, knowing that the tax assessor is doing a first pass at these every year to make sure they're complying with certain pieces. Maybe there's a way that we could actually sort of negotiate like an economies of scales agreement with a monitoring agent that would bring that down for the individual property owners aggregating it. I'm trying to think about sort of different ways we might approach this because I think it might come up as an honest snafu.
Touchdown. Regulatory contract or held by law and statute. That's not tied that trumps our
Yep.
home rule charter.
Yep. Yeah. It's it comes from state statute. It's the Low and Moderate Income Housing Act that basically mandates or puts forward that each municipality must have 10% of the affordable housing, and then establishes what each of those units must have in place to count as a unit. One of them is you must be working with a Rhode Island approved monitoring agent, and the other ones are things like the duration and the affordability of like 30-year, 99-year restrictions, those pieces.
What do you have to do to become a Rhode Island approved monitoring agent?
That's another good question to think about going through this, right?
Encore career.
So that's a new one, but that just, when I was like about an hour before our meeting, I was like, oh, I wonder what that's going to be. So that's something, good heads around a table. Let's keep thinking about where that might go and what might be some sort of interesting ways to wrap our heads around what that is. The last one on this is special use permits in the R200 zoning district. R200 zoning district is like 4.8 acre lots. ADUs out there need to have a special use permit on their property to have an accessory apartment on them. Not allowed by right. You need to spend some time with the zoning board to get a special use permit. Unfortunately, the special use permit permanently encumbers your property and can cause you other issues along the way. For example, you can't get a special use permit and a dimensional variance on the same lot. And so there are things that will run with your property in perpetuity when you have a special use permit in place on it for the use that's there. Both.
I thought you couldn't get them for the same project. You can't get them ever.
You can't get them on the same. You can't get them on the same lot. There is some argument in gray area about if you had two really separate things happening on a property and one needed this and one needed that, but it's a gray area, and it's almost like you would have to, sort of the scenario that seems to float in that is like you had a business over here that was built too close to a property line and so had a dimensional variance because of it over here, and then there was a whole other area for development on the same parcel. A new business was coming in that, say, had a drive-through and needed a special use permit. Potentially, you could look at those as being not affiliated with each other, but if they're for the same use, it gets inherently more muddy. We talked about this with the planning board Tuesday night a bit, and a lot of it relates to groundwater. So we ended up actually, the conversation sort of ended up shaping a little bit around, is it more that we want special use permits over areas that are on our groundwater protection overlay district because they're going to be on OWTS systems and we want to make sure that there's the best possible stewarding of groundwater? Is it because they're over sensitive environmental areas? If that's the case, like if that's the sort of thing we're watching there, perfectly valid thing to be watching. It's not just the R200 lots. There are 20 lots over the groundwater protection overlay district. It's not the zoning district, actually. It's where they are relative to where groundwater protection overlay district may be. The other thought was that they potentially are large enough parcels that you can lose track of what's actually happening in them. You might not be seeing the accessory apartment that becomes bigger over time, et cetera. And so maybe that was part of the intention of it. Joe, were there any other things that came up in that? So that was sort of an interesting piece for us to look at is if we're concerned about the septic loading and the groundwater protection overlay district, then there might actually be a different way we approach that than to say it's the R200 zone. At face value, an accessory apartment on a 4.5 acre lot is likely the least impactful scenario on a neighbor-to-neighbor impact on an accessory apartment. They're very large lots. So if we're looking at the groundwater piece, we might actually want to be filtering that different than our R200 zone district. We want to be filtering it by, are you over a groundwater protection overlay district and not on public sewer? So that's
How much of towns in that overlay district do you any sense?
yeah, good amount. Good amount. Ken probably knows better than I do. Largely so from Kingston, it sort of swings all the way up to like Kingston Hill, right up by URI. It swings all the way out to West Kingston. Comes all the way down by Curtis Corner and Southborough, maybe further south. And there's another section of it, I believe, where there's some wellheads in a different area that I always sort of lose track of.
Some wellheads over on Town Pond across the street.
Yeah.
So it would still sort of be considered more of the outer ring sort of part of town, though.
Yeah, the only exception to it is really West Kingston. West Kingston, where it's half acre, there's a lot of half acre zoning lots. Those are sitting on top of the groundwater protection property. But yeah, largely you're right. So those are sort of some of the pieces of changes we're thinking about looking at for just how we make sure that we're sort of rolling out a program that we know soup to nuts what it contains when we're talking about it.
Okay, well, that's a lot of information.
I know, guys. I'm like,
But wait, there's more.
I know, right? And then you think, and now there are 2 more topics. Kayla, what are you going to do to it? We don't need to. I wanted to spend a lot of time on the ADUs because you guys have been working on the ADUs a lot, and you know, I know that to be something that's been very squarely in things we've been talking about, and I think it's nice to have a whole picture on it. The cottage zoning piece, the inclusionary zoning piece. To be really frank with you guys, I just wanted to get it on your agenda, let you know, let you guys see what the drafts look like, see if people had sort of first thoughts or considerations or things that were of interest to you all on it. I think Jen, what's next on our actual agenda here?
Inclusionary is next, if we're gonna.
Yeah, so
Down the line.
inclusionary. Over the next few months, I would love it if we can have a conversation here about trying to get a little bit more idea on what the affordability target prices we want to see are for units. Our inclusionary zoning right now says units all need to be at 80% of area median income with a 99-year deed restriction. State statute basically allows that to go up to 120% of area median income with a 30-year deed restriction. A thing to know about what that does as development pressures in the town is that if you abide by our rules, you play by the rules. If you come in and conforming with our zoning, we hold you to, it's tougher to build those units than if you were to come in as a comprehensive permit application and ask for relief from whatever standards of the zoning ordinance you want. You actually can be building far more expensive units that you can sell at far higher prices, and you have a less length of time or need to commit to those deed restrictions if you go outside of the town's rules. And at the end of the day, if we believe in our zoning, I would love to see us in a spot where we think our zoning is the easier thing for someone to work through. And I don't think this is a flat answer, which is bring all of our standards up to the highest standard, because we also want to make sure that the units we're bringing in reflect the range percentage of incomes that actually need housing, and it's not just people at 120, it's not just people at 80, it's people below and everywhere in between. But when, by the rules, you have to put 20% of your units as 80% deed restricted with 99 years, and to throw the baby out with the bathwater and go outside of the rule box, 25% of your units, it's only a 5% increase in the percentage of units you're providing, which on the scale of development we see in South Kingstown is largely zero. It's usually a rounding error one way or the other. It ends up maybe with one more unit than the inclusionary zoning would, but it tends to put us in a spot where the developments we're seeing might not align with a lot of the other standards we like to see development in the town align with. So I think over the next few months, one of the things I'd really like us to think about with the inclusionary zoning is how do we provide meaningful density bonuses for people who are building affordable housing in our inclusionary zoning, but also how do we want to be targeting those units at different income rates? Do we want to be taking a little bit less of a flat approach there? Do we want to say things that go a little bit more along the mindset, and this was something that came out of Tuesday night, something that goes a little bit more along the lines of if you're helping us build sort of our most vulnerable, our least able to afford housing people, if you're helping us on that end, do we require you to build less of those units? But if you tried to go up to a higher percentage of area median income, do we require more of the units? Like, is there a proportionality on affordability we want to say, yes, you could, yes, if you came in and you built these all at 120% of area median income, you're going to have to build more of those for us. There's perverse incentives throughout every time I look at housing policy, to be honest with you, but I think I want to start sort of thinking about different ways to do it. Is 80 the number we really want to be having in our zoning? Some towns are moving in the direction of making it their inclusionary zoning more lenient, so they're less apt to have people taking the comprehensive permit route. Some communities are doing the exact opposite consideration and saying our neediest people are lower than that, and that's who we need to be helping here. There's also an idea of thinking about a hybrid approach that came out of a talk with the planning board on Tuesday about whether or not we want to spend some time thinking about what a hybrid approach like that might be that had a little bit more nuance.
My thought, and kind of going along with the other conversation, you gotta meet different needs of the community. The people that are coming in, developers that I've seen come in using the statewide comprehensive permit, since the state allows them to go from 80 to 120%, they're all at 120%. So, that's quite a bit of relief over the town requirements of 80%. And the town requirements in inclusionary zoning is 20% of your housing. With the statewide comprehensive permit, it's only 25%, so it's not that much more. And so I think we're starting to see a lot more towards the comprehensive permit. There's some disadvantages of the statewide comprehensive permit too, just kind of lose that. I was kind of thinking something like this, a scale where maybe it's 60 to 120%, and at 60% you only have to develop 10%. If you go to 80%, you only have to develop 15%. When you get up to the 120, which is what the state is, then you have to build the 25, which is comparable to that. So some developers may say, no, I'm going to build the 25% at 120. Others may say, you know what, I'm just going to bite the bullet and only build one or two of these and go to the 60% requirement. And it gives the developer somewhat flexibility on, what he thinks is one, most marketable, and two, how he wants to meet the requirements. So something like that is, I was thinking maybe may help us meet different needs of the community and make it a little more flexibility for the developer.
Are there any challenges in that lower end, and like if we're thinking about things looking integrated and similar, things like that, you think?
Well, on this one, the developer's probably definitely going to be losing money, right? He's definitely going to lose money on that house, but it's only a lot fewer houses. This one, maybe he could break even, but he's going to have to take a bigger percentage of his market rate.
site lays out what their raw costs are, it's just, you know they're just gonna do a calculation. This is where I maximize.
Yeah, so they got,
You know, so it's interesting, because, you know, we're bending over backwards to try to develop tools, but, you know, if we just give them one tool, they're still gonna, just run the calculation.
well, the problem is that right now, I think a lot of developers are saying, you know, I'm gonna use the comprehensive permit. And you know what, I'm gonna go at 120%, it's gonna get me close to market. I really don't have to build that many more units, build 5% more.
Which honestly, when most of our projects are 10 and 12 units, 5% isn't really a whole
Sometimes it doesn't trip it up.
Yeah.
Are there any financing challenges? The financing is my weak link on this. If you're changing the different percentages.
For affordable housing units?
You know.
Loan program can do
I've heard a fair amount of talk about how when you get down to the 60% AMI person, that person's going to have a hard time qualifying for a mortgage.
There's that part.
And so I think there's a piece, honestly, to look at too on saying when you prefer something to be home ownership versus when you want it to be a rental housing unit, right?
And to that point, you know, so we've got kind of like the stick approach, not necessarily the carrot developers, but just on sticks, trying to make it like a carrot. So people were trying to help the future tenants. Is there another model where, I mean, the market's the market, developers, builders, they do their thing, they know they're gonna build it as efficiently as they can. Is there another mechanism to introduce subsidy into the equation that's not directly involved in this type of setup that we have? Instead, just focuses on the person. I mean, back in the day, they had impact fees, and the town collected them, and there was a mechanism to use that money back into some program that never really part of it. So, with exception to some of the impact fees are just really short. I'm just wondering if there's another way to approach this. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Builders gonna build that. That's what they do. They do a great job building and making money. But introducing these complications is difficult. There's still that separation. There's still that personal need on the outside. That's the personal one.
Yeah. There's another piece that I think you guys will, if you think back, honestly, to probably last time I was in an affordable housing collaborative meeting with you all, probably a year ago, and we talked a little bit about how we don't give, right now our inclusionary zoning is a little out of whack with state statute because we don't give bonuses to offset, or we tell you the carrot is the stick. So the easiest way for and that is actually directly in response to our municipal requirement to provide subsidies to developers to develop the type of housing. The easiest way for a town to give a subsidy is to say, sure, here's your subsidy. Your subsidy is you can build another market rate unit than you would have otherwise. There's the profit you took from that is what you're going to have to use to subsidize to offset your other thing. That's the easiest way because there's no real municipal skin in the game on that, right? We're not having to manage funds or figure out some other way to get things to people. The state has a fee in lieu of development of affordable housing scheme that exists. I don't know how familiar people are with that, but basically the state sets an amount of money that a developer can pay you instead of building the affordable housing. Roughly about just under like $50,000, I think. Do you know what it is? 40. Yeah. Is it 40? Yeah, I thought it was almost like 40. Yeah, I thought it was like 48 or something. But anyway, you're probably right. That number, in South Kingstown, we don't allow you to do it. In South Kingstown, we don't allow you to do it. We used to allow you to do it. The program went away, and probably 5 to 10 years ago, somewhere in that window of time. We pulled that away because we couldn't use it fast enough. If you don't use it, it goes, the state takes it, goes to Rhode Island Housing. So you have a period of money that comes in for affordable housing units to develop affordable housing, and if you don't use it in time, it goes away. We could study a little bit, and I don't know enough about it right now, to know if we could use that, pot of money, if we allowed it, to do things like provide incentives to the person on the end who you're talking about.
I mean, I'm just curious. Charlestown took advantage of the opportunity. Grant money, but Charleston puts again, they created a lot of housing. Town. I don't know if there's a scenario where, for example, these people like come in, maybe it's just the highest level, the town will reserve the right to purchase a certain amount of the housing stock, within the first 120 days of the available market. And if the town had a mechanism to have funding for this, wherever the money came from, and if we had a list of people that were qualified, to buy houses, is that an opportunity to get people in houses and just let the developers build? That's what they do.
And take away the sort of management of that from them.
I feel like one of the challenges is that affordable housing is developed in one way and market rate is developed in another, and like we have this desire for mixed income neighborhoods, but how do we do that if the funding streams feel so completely separate? I mean, and that's, to me, I'm not like inside the game completely, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like if you want to get a lot of affordable housing and you build it all together, right, and you get the financing for that, and it's a totally different way of doing things than the way we're developing traditional subdivisions or something. And that's the challenge. And the reason, I feel a little nervous about completely letting go of some kind of inclusionary zoning structure, because there's still, lots of people who want to be in more diverse neighborhoods that aren't so separated by income. So it's challenging. On the other hand, we've talked many times and said inclusionary zoning is not going to solve this problem if we want to try and have a percentage that's higher. It's going to be really hard to get there just with that.
Yeah, we don't see a ton of inclusionary zoning units being built. I mean, we get an annual count every year. Ours goes up there. I mean, the entirety functionally of what the affordable housing units we bring online every year come through inclusionary zoning right now. And it's not a big
Hardly
number. It's a handful. I think our number last year went up by single digits. It's not me to getting us there, right? But so those are some of the things I think we're thinking about trying to figure out in inclusionary zoning is how do we make inclusionary zoning development something that it's easier that you're more likely to play within our rule book on, and that we're making sure that on the end the units we're producing with it are meeting the needs of the people we have around.
At some point in the future, could we talk potentially about just the town's relationship to like lands that might be available in the town? It's like one of the things, I don't know, that seems like one of the major expenses in trying to create affordable housing. That's probably for a later part of the agenda.
But yes. Cottage zoning. Cool. It is cool. It's neat.
It's the next
new.
ADU.
It's the next ADU. It is. I've been learning a bit about where it came from historically. It's kind of interesting. It came very much in the U.S. from California and the way immigrant housing was being developed in the 1950s. There was apparently sort of largely coming from the way West Coast communities were developing with influx of immigrant population, what was being built, and then it's found that those were creating really neat little neighborhoods for people. And in the 90s, the West Coast started trying to put rules together to say, hey, could we actually start creating more of those now that we're all living very strict into the world of zoning? Could we start making it so more of those could show up? Because those that existed from back in that day, they're really neat. It took a long time before anybody started getting any success with it. In Oregon, they finally started getting some traction in like the mid-90s on it, and now this is a neat way to do things. I'll sort of just tell you, for us right now, it's largely been starting as a conversation on what's the density in it. Right? The draft that's in front of you guys has a very, very high density, that 15 units per acre. In context, the densest we allow you in South Kingstown to build an apartment building is at 7.71 dwelling units per acre. So it's a double of the maximum density we allow for apartment buildings.
Is that true in commercial downtown? Because you need 5,000 for the first and then 20 for each initial, which would be higher
Yep.
than 7.
Yeah. Commercial downtown is the only place that it's not true. And the
So-
subdivision regulations, actually, when you kick out to the subregs, they tell you regardless of what it is, you can't build that after the subdivision.
Even commercial downtown.
That's another place where the rules in two different places don't say the same thing. But largely it's a big change in density. People generally tend to find you need a large increase in density to get that to actually be built the way it is. Otherwise, they don't sort of serve that tight-knit feeling of cottage development that people want there. The planning board conversation talked a bit about sort of the number of units it takes to make the space, right? The draft from Horsley Litton says 6. There was some talk 4. You can create a quadrant pretty easily, and a space maybe we don't need to have 6, because 6 also ends up largely putting you in a spot where you're not going to see it coming in some of your R10 lots and whatnot. You end up with the sizes that, the math that you play out on the back end of that means you're not going to see them in there. You see it maybe in your R20s, R30s. And then there's also the other side where you get out into your large 2-acre, 4-acre lots where that 15 dwelling units per acre out on some of those larger lots, the design concepts that are really written into cottage zoning are not going to play out the same way at that scale as they would on smaller scale, on smaller lots. And so we talked a little bit about sort of thinking about what zones it was right in and playing a bit with the numbers in there. Honestly, had a very interesting conversation on Tuesday night with the planning board about how much design to regulate the pieces that are in there, sort of say no synthetic products, no vinyl, right? There's materials standards in there too. There was some discussion around the table of they make really great products right now that are vinyl that you couldn't really tell the difference of. There are actually some very nice innovative projects out there that would keep the general affordability of the cottage units maybe a little better than if we actually started having a lot of requirements that just kept slowly creeping the price of these units up.
Expensive cottages.
Right. There was talk of there's a development in that is a cottage zoning development that's sort of a poster child in Rhode Island, so far as I can tell. And those, actually, some of the planning board members were pulling up sales prices on them, and there was like an 880 square foot cottage that was going for $300,000. So there's some things we actually there may be something that ends up going at. Inevitably, they won't be $450,000, I would hope. But there is a piece to the cottages that a really nice little cottage can actually be quite a valuable little piece of property if people are really wanting that. There are a lot of people, empty nesters, downsizing, who are looking for those little tight neighborhoods together. So that's kind of the third in the suite of things we're going to kind of be working on over the next few months.
I think we need to address the apartment density. It's 7.2, so if you had a half acre of land in commercial downtown, the maximum you can put is 3 apartments in it.
I've been talking with Amy Goins about this a little bit, about should the zoning ordinance in the commercial downtown will trump the subdivision regulations when it comes to a legal court, right? The subregs are an inferior document to the zoning ordinance. If there's a standard in both, the zoning ordinance governs.
Well, there's also regulations that say that if there's conflict between the two, the more stringent it becomes.
And see, exactly, that's what I've been sort of talking through, like, which one is it? Because often our zoning ordinance prefers you out to the subregs, says you can build it at 5,000, at that that CD zone, and then says, see the subdivision regulations for extra considerations. You flip to the subregs, and it goes, yeah, about that, not so much, 7.71. And so there's a lot of interplay in between those that needs a little longer.
Because that wouldn't make sense. You're having a lot of commercial downtown district.
Right, that's not the type of land use you actually really want in downtown.
Right.
It's not really. I just mean like at that scale, right? So that's kind of what's going on. People have got thoughts on those last ones. I totally tired everybody. So the 19th. There'll be some communication before that, I'm sure, on sort of what the style of the event's going to be like, how it's going to go.
Here? You have it here, you think?
I want to do it at the rec center. I think that our thought is to have it be a little bit more of an engaging move around, walk around.
What time is that going to be?
Yeah, are we playing around with like a 4 to 8, 5 to 8 kind of thing, like open housey, sort of?
Like a window of time where people could.
Like the comp plan. Remember when the comp plan was at the Y? Kind of that, right? Similar to that style where there's,
Did something right after
At the rec center, yeah.
oh, this committee, something else.
I'm losing track of which committee.
Because this committee did something at the rec center too.
Was that the planning or was that?
Both of those things have happened.
Oh,
All three, actually, all three.
All
of them.
those things
All
have
three of
happened.
Those things have happened.
It's all
We did-
true.
We did the open house at the Y, which was actually a few months before I started working here. But you guys all did that with the comp plan kickoff, and then about a year and a half later, maybe about 9 months later, we had a housing forum at the rec center, which you guys all remember. And then we had a comp plan walk around goals feedback loop meeting at the rec center too. So it had to move around stations. So we've done all those things. We'll do another one like that. All right.
One interesting footnote as we're backing up. We had a corporate meeting today, and the banks, we get CRA money from the federal government, Community Reinvestment Act money. But, we want to lend money for low to moderate income buyers, and part of that whole CRA, it's not just money that we get, it's the things like it's the ability for me to have an office in Wakefield, for example, in a non-low and moderate income area where if we're not meeting our CRA goals, we're not allowed to do those sorts of things. And we're trying to lend money now. There's just it's not just here, it's everywhere. I mean, as far as just the housing, the folks that can qualify for that type of stuff are buying affordable homes. It's just, there's such a lack of it that we're almost in a crisis mode. My bank is a Boston-based bank, but it's everywhere.
Is it lower rates or is it the same rate?
No, it's special programs. Like our big one is our exclusive portfolio one is the no money down, no PMI, but it has an income limit. The income limit is $52,650 for a whole household. Which I've done 2 of them here in town. Although those people were putting 10% down or 15% down, almost impossible to find. It really is like a needle in a haystack for the type of property they qualify for. But it's a great program, and it counts towards those CRA credits that we get. We take them very seriously. All the banks do. I mean, all the your Citizens, your Santaners, we're all in the same boat. And it's a requirement from the federal government, and there's money behind it, and there's the ability to do all the things that we want to do. But there's just such a lack of the ability to find places for the people. The gap between income and housing is just growing and growing. It's,
You need something in the 300,000 range?
I'm talking 225, 230. I mean, with that particular program, if you're really putting zero down, your sweet spot is probably, depending on the property taxes, it's probably about 225. This particular one was like 265 in the town, and he was putting 10% down, so it worked. But it's hard to find. And the banks want to lend the money, we have to. It's not that we want to. It was like a crisis.
I don't think you get too much on that 300.
They're out there, they come and go real quick. So before we adjourn, you have a 2020 meeting schedule. Obviously, we're doing February, and then November, December, we had the same challenge as last year, so I don't know what we're going to do. We'll try to figure it out maybe in August or September, though. So any issues with the usual time, usual Thursdays, 7? All right, so do we need to officially approve this? I don't know. We're just going to continue
You
with the
can
same?
just continue,
Okay,
yeah.
great, super.
Yeah, I did the packet.
Oh, it's in the packet.
And they're all always posted on the Secretary of State's website. It's a requirement. So
Motion to approve the calendar.
All right, and so we will adjourn at 8:58. Everyone agrees, I'm quite sure.